Welcome to a workshop offered by the Henry Clay PTSA at Fayette County Public Schools here in Lexington, Kentucky. Today we're going to be talking about teen driving safety, and we have a guest speaker with us from Safe Kids Fayette County, and her name is Sherry Hanan, and she is going to be offering us lots of great tips that we as parents need to know, and also you can discuss with your teen drivers. Thank you so much, Sherry, for being with us today.
Well, I appreciate the invitation to come and present. This is a really important topic, so I applaud all of you all for taking a little bit of time out of your evening to just kind of listen, and hopefully there will be something that I will say through tonight's presentation that will be an aha moment for you, and maybe it's something you hadn't considered, maybe it's just something that will maybe have open up some conversations that you have with your teen driver or your soon to be teen driver. This is a presentation that comes from a impact teen driver organization that's out of California. I've been trained to do the presentation, but just know that this is the parent portion. I had to cut it a little bit just so that we could get it in our time together. But there is also a couple different programs, as I shared in the first couple minutes, that some of us were just casually talking about the topic that we can do for actual teen drivers. So if this is something that the school would want those upperclassmen to hear, then we can set up something that we can partner with the school to get this information out. And again, it's very timely with graduation and prom coming up. So again, thank you for being here. Just a little bit about myself. I am a registered nurse at the Kentucky Children's Hospital. I do coordinate the Safe Kids Fayette County injury prevention program, and it's external facing from the hospital, and it's all about injury prevention. And we do a lot of things with young child passengers with car seats and booster seats. We have a safe passengers program, but we also do a teen driver safety program because we know that is a very vulnerable population. So we want to make sure that we're getting messages out to those new drivers and also to the parents of those new drivers, because as the title says, they're under your influence. And so these are just some topics, maybe things for you all to talk about, come to an agreement over. So we're going to dive right in. And I'll leave some time at the end if anybody has any comments or questions that they would like to ask. So jot those down so you don't forget about it. Okay, so you're already have a teen driver, getting ready to have one. And this is important because we know that this is a very dangerous time. Every year we lose thousands of young people in a preventable car crash. And when I say preventable, it's typically where there has been some sort of fault with, a driver who is maybe speeding or distracted, being reckless. So, not so much necessarily, bad road conditions or, a deer jumping out in front of them. So we're kind of going to stay under the umbrella of, what is preventable. A lot of people think that these teen fatalities are mostly the driver. And of course, there are a lot of teen drivers that are killed. But typically, when we talk about teens and fatalities related to motor vehicle crashes, many of them are passengers in the car of a teen driver. So this is also something to think about when your child is actually riding with an inexperienced teen driver. There is risk associated with that. So, just think about, the high numbers with teen fatalities aren't just the drivers. Many more of them are the passengers in the car of those teen drivers. The good news is you're able to hopefully have some of these hard conversations with your teen about your driving expectations. It is a privilege, and it is not a right that you have. So you have to kind of be able to prove that you can make smart choices. and not be a risk taker. And you know your child better than anyone else. So you're able to determine, how serious your child is taking this responsibility, if they're making good choices, if they're putting in the time and effort to be a good driver, studying that manual to learn the rules of the road. But also know that they have watched you for all these many years, probably since they were probably, 3 and 4 year olds. Turning forward facing in their car seats. They have learned how you drive, how to drive, watching stoplights, watching pedestrians, looking at, people passing and speeding. So kids start to learn how to drive at very young ages. So just know that, you're a role model for your teen driver. So if were texting and driving, they're going to think that's okay. If you're speeding, they're going to think, oh, well, you can always say it's okay to speed sometimes and not other times. Do you speed in neighborhoods where we actually need to, follow those speed limits in case someone darts out in the middle of the road? Are you having a alcoholic beverage while you're driving? Are you driving distracted? And sometimes, kids can call out parents about saying, you shouldn't be texting, you shouldn't be, trying to do something else while you're operating a motor vehicle. So again, just be mindful of that you are the role model for your child's, driving knowledge and their driving behavior. So your choices can and do influence your teen behind the wheel. So these are just some driving statistics. We know that there is a 40% reduction of serious injuries and fatalities to teens once they instituted the graduated driver licensing laws. Many of us that, have kids that are, I have 3 grown kids, so I've gone through, 3 teens getting their license. But, when I took my permit, I could take my driving road test in 6 weeks. And many of you all may have, been under that same um, law. And so now we have the graduated driver licensing laws that we're going to get into a little bit later on. But those laws made it so that it was a longer, drawn out process. So kids were hopefully being enabled to get more practice, more experience behind the wheel. So they're not just quickly just getting a little bit of practice over a few weeks and then take their road test, which, kids typically share that. They learn the road test route and then they, make that, what they practice. And then some of the other types of, driving like merging or, driving in traffic, driving at higher speeds, interstate driving, those kinds of things, they're not getting any of that kind of practice. So we know that the graduated driver licensing has reduced the number of teen fatalities, and so that's a good thing. We know that if teens have other people in the car, or if they drive at night, that increase their risk of being in a motor vehicle crash. And that just makes sense because I think, when you're got conversations going on and maybe music and singing and having a good time and laughing, you're probably not as focused to the task of actually driving as you would be if you were alone or just maybe had one person in the car. Nighttime driving is very different than daytime driving, and it takes some extra skill and practice in order to, be able to safely navigate in the dark. And then the last thing there is that we know that a lot of these teen fatalities, when they do the accident reconstruction, they are not finding that alcohol and drugs is a contributing factor to a lot of these crashes with teen drivers. It's usually all these other things, the texting and driving, the distractions, speeding, and it's not alcohol and drugs. So still have those conversations about, how, that's not acceptable, that's, in society that has changed where, it's taboo, if you're, drink and drive, we know that can be deadly. And so we've had kind of a change in the culture with that. And so, we are seeing that result in the teens who are not using alcohol and drugs, um, but not buckling up. Maybe driving drowsy. Those types of things are typically some of the causes that we're finding out are happening in those motor vehicle crashes. So I think we have a video next. Hopefully it is going to work. I love my kids. And let's be real, we parents know raising teens is really hard. I'm constantly reminding my kids how to drive and ride safely. But do they listen? Of course not. Classic teenagers. I tell them, don't eat while driving. I say, no talking. You gotta pay attention to what you're doing. I just don't know where they get it from. You just saw it's so easy to fall into the habit of do as I say, not as I do. It didn't work for us when we were kids. So why do we think it will work on our teens? I'm a parent, you're a parent, and it can be overwhelming thinking about all the different things that go into having our children learn to drive. Did you know that car crashes are the number one killer of teens in America? Particularly those caused by reckless and distracted driving. Driving too fast and anything that takes your hands off the wheel, eyes off the road, or mind off the drive, that's reckless and distracted driving. And guess what? 75% of those situations happen to teens who aren't under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Imagine your child losing their life or taking someone else's. How would your life change? It happens every day and it can happen to you. As a parent myself, I know how devastating. But the good news is, it doesn't matter what we did yesterday. It's what we start to do today. 100% passion. Distracted driving are preventable. One of the ways states try to help parents prevent these horrible crashes is through graduated driver license laws, GDL. These regulations go through different stages of routine. It's about slowly stepping up the freedom behind the wheel to go along with gaining the needed experience to be responsible. They reduce the two biggest risk factors for routine driving. Our teens are 4 times more likely to be involved in a fatal crash at night. And the same is true if there are 3 or 4 teens in the car. I'm sure some of you may have heard the term GDL, but how many of us know the letter of the law states when the curfew, how passengers and what age. These laws are 40%. That means it's worth our time to learn and follow your local graduated driver licensing laws. And remember, as parents, we can always choose to place more restrictions than the bare stated in the law. Our kids' lives, as mothers. How about you? She didn't just walk in and like she lit up the world. She was always smiling. She had the biggest dimple. Riley was the driver, and Abby, her friend, was in the passenger.
It's back passenger seat. And all I cared about was getting that stuff first. Right against the she's scared. And I was just gonna scream into the road. It was chaos. When I ran into the stall, it was running. When Ryan was around, it was never quiet. It was all the time, nonstop. And now it's just quiet. As a parent, I can barely imagine the pain and suffering Ryan's family and friends endure every day in lives. Especially there's so many places that talk to your kids. We can't protect them without being fully transparent. Just like us. Help them believe in themselves, not just do on every little detail of what we do as a driver or passenger in the car. Drive the way you want your team to drive. Your actions. Put away all distractions like phones, food, makeup, before you start the car. Follow all I really guard you that are your influence. Using these simple everyday tips, your family and everyone else think we can stop the number one killer of young people, preventable car crashes. I love my.
I'm just now seeing some of the chat where you're not hearing the sound very well. So hopefully when this goes out, it will be better. I guess we can try to work on that. But that was just, a video, sadly, of a family that experienced a loss of again, a teen that was a passenger in a vehicle of a teen driver. So, those are kind of hard to watch because as parents, you can just think of the unimaginable and how that would feel. And of course, we hear those stories all the time. But again, this is why we're having a conversation tonight, is that we're trying to be proactive in preventing these types of occurrences, so that we don't lose our young people. So we're going to move ahead here with distracted driving. It comes in different forms, and this is probably something that you all are already aware of, but it's typically one of these four ways that someone operating a vehicle can be distracted. Of course, visually, that's when you take your eyes off the road. So if you're, looking away, at your phone, if you're looking at your passengers, if you're turned around, if you're looking at the radio, anytime your eyes are off the road, you're not able to kind of see what's going on in front of you. Is a car stopping? Is there a pedestrian? Any of those types of things. So again, just reinforcing the importance of, the task that you are doing is driving the vehicle. So paying attention, keeping your eyes on the road. The manual piece of this is when your hands are off the steering wheel. So again, if you're, eating your Chick-fil-A sandwich, or you're digging through your purse to find chapstick, whatever that might be, that is a distraction as well, because your hands need to be, on the wheel so that you can, of course, navigate the vehicle. Cognitively, that can be a distraction as well. I think we've all kind of been caught like daydreaming where we're driving and we can't even remember like how we got from point A to point B because we're just on autopilot, kind of muscle memory, if we kind of take the same routes all the time. And us as experienced drivers, making some of those same routes, it's not as scary. But when it's a teen driver that, needs to be kind of looking around, looking in their mirrors, all those kinds of things, when you're not paying attention, you're not focused, you're distracted, then that takes away from your ability to make, good decisions. Auditory is when you're not hearing. So if you've got the music blaring, if people are laughing and singing and cutting up, just being loud, you're not going to be able to maybe, hear someone coming up on you or hear an emergency vehicle that's approaching. So, discourage, wearing earplugs, having the radio up too high. And again, just, limiting those passengers so that conversations and what occurs inside the vehicle doesn't get kind of too wild and crazy. The thing that is one of the most at risk is when we start introducing a bunch of passengers. If you look at the chart here, if there are no one else in the vehicle, there's just the driver there. There's relative risk is almost nothing. Then the more passengers that you add to the vehicle, then all of that continues to increase the risk of being in a motor vehicle crash. Then, of course, if you look at the last one, if there's an adult in the car, of course, they're probably going to be called out if they start speeding, start to be reckless, going over the line, anything like that, that they'll be called out on that and be corrected. So, but just, mom and dad's there, grandparents, someone, they're going to try to probably be on their best driving behavior and follow all the rules of the road. So, just think about that. And that's why we have the graduated driver licensing law that says that you can only have one unrelated person in the vehicle with you. And I know just from my experience, when my kids were in high school and drivers, a lot of parents overlooked that. but that's just because we don't want to put the driver at risk for all of those distractions. We don't want there to be a motor vehicle crash and there's a car load of kids in there. So there's always reasoning why. It's not to, to truly dictate what families can do, but it's just for that safety of making sure that the driver's not distracted and we don't have a car full of young people. So what we like to do when we talk to a group of high schoolers is to say, tell me things that you think are lethal. And they'll say, a gun, jumping out of an airplane, a sword, a cobra, they come up with just a list of all kinds of different things. But then I say to them, what about lip gloss? Do you think lip gloss is lethal? What about a Starbucks coffee? Is that lethal? McDonald's, Big Mac, is that lethal? And they're like, no, 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 no. You can't die from a Big Mac or putting chapstick on. But when it comes to driving, those can be lethal things. So we have what we do with them is this wheel of risk. And so we, put the passengers around, and then you add passengers, and then you add, some of these distractions that might be going on in the car. Then all of those things, the more that you introduce these risk factors, the more prone that they may be to having a motor vehicle crash. And as you just heard from the story, if you didn't hear, I'll tell you that the crash that took the life of a passenger in the back seat, the vehicle behind them that hit was only going 34 miles an hour. So it doesn't have to be, a high rate of speed before there can be, a fatal crash. But this is what we share with them, that the more distractions and things that you may not even think about as being lethal can be lethal. So, discouraging kids from going through the drive-through and then, driving their car, discouraging them, make sure they have their maps already loaded. If they're, doing GPS, have their radio on, whatever they want to listen to, make sure the volume is not way up. Just, go ahead and do all of that prep before they actually put the vehicle in drive and start. So we're going to talk about some of the things that make driving more dangerous. And these are just some things for you all to kind of think a little bit about. And because we're kind of getting up on our time, I want to make sure we can get through it. I'm just going to talk about these. So this one is reduced visibility. And that is, making sure that you take the time to go out and practice nighttime driving. It just looks very different at night. You can't see as well everything that is around you. Some places are better lit than others. So just making sure that, especially on routes that your teen is going to be driving frequently, make sure that they can master that nighttime driving. And just, again, practice, 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 and get those nighttime driving hours. And just know that, fog and different types of weather conditions, if it's pouring down rain, all of those things can impact, visibility as well. So, making sure that the car is maintained and those wipers work and all that good stuff. The next one here that you see is, impaired drivers. And your child may follow all of the rules. They may, be, very cognizant of their responsibility, but we all know that there's a risk of being on the road with what choices other people make. So, there may be people that are driving distracted, people that are driving intoxicated or drugged. And so we want to make sure that kids know that, this isn't just about their ability to drive, but it's their ability to pay attention, to not be vulnerable if there is, someone that is passing in your lane. You are paying attention so that you can make a choice to get over, to pull off on the shoulder, to do something to try to avoid that crash. So again, you're also having to anticipate, maybe what other drivers are doing, tailgating, speeding, passing. So, your team driver has to, kind of know about, some of these things that they can anticipate and plan for. Drowsy driving, you see that young girl there, that's just something that we see a lot with teens. They drive drowsy. Maybe they have a job that they work late. Maybe they stayed up late studying for a test or getting that paper wrote. So making sure that if your teen is sleepy, that maybe you say, I'll drive you to school today. I don't want you to drive because I know you're sleepy. And then, of course, by the end of the school day, they're even more sleepy. And so just thinking about those things, if your kid is, medicated because, they've had allergies or the flu and they're taking medicine, just making sure that you keep those things in mind when you're allowing them to get behind the wheel of the car. And then you can't really see it there, but it's a deer that is getting ready to leap out in the middle of the road. And, some of those things we really can't anticipate. Again, an impaired driver that might be doing something, wrong and stupid, or, an animal that is jumping out in the middle of the road. We know crashes like that occur all the time. But again, having the driver to be focused, paying attention so that maybe they can anticipate and make a move. And then talk to your kid about some of those situations. Tell them to not swerve to miss a dog or a cat that's in the road, because when a car is going even 20 miles per hour, you swerve, you can lose control, you can hit something, you can go off an embankment. So have those conversations, teach the things that you think that's probably not very relevant, and talk about it, practice, so that kids can gain the skills that they need before they're just really and truly, cut loose and become drivers without any of that supervision. Okay, I'm going to shift through these. Skip. Okay, so I'm not sure if you all know what the graduated driver's licensing laws are for the state of Kentucky. Hopefully that's something that you've did your homework about. If your team has gotten their license or getting ready to get their license, there used to be a book that they would give you and you could study. Now and everything is online. And then when the child feels ready, they've taken a bunch of those practice tests and they feel like they're going to pass, then they go down to the clerk's office and they take their driver's test. I think they have to, take an eye test. And then if they pass their test, they can get their learner's permit. They have that for a while, and then you can get your intermediate license and then your full driver's license in the state of Kentucky. And we're going to break that down just a little bit more. The learner permit you have for at least 6 months. They will tell you that you can't take your road test until a certain date. So anytime after that date, you would be eligible for your road test. But it's for 6 months. And then when you get your intermediate, you get a little sticker. That's your road test, typically with a state trooper. If you pass your road test, then you have another 6 months that they want you to continue to practice and get some experience with all the different types of driving before you get your full license 1 year after you've had your learner permit and your intermediate. Some teens go for way longer. They don't try for their license. They're even their intermediate for months and months. It's just the 6 months is the very minimum. But if your teen isn't ready, they don't want to take it, their driver's test, and they have their permit a year, that's okay too. And then again, once you have your intermediate, you don't have to be in a rush to go get your full license till you're ready. So the GDL, the permit phase, of course, this is getting ready to change, I think. If you've kept up with anything legislatively this session, I think a bill is going to the governor's desk to allow at 15 years old for children to get their permit. That is something different, but there is still a clause in there that says that you can't get your full license till you're 17. But we are going to probably start to see if the governor signs this bill, 15-year-olds being able to get their permit and start being behind the wheel of a car. So that again is a choice that a caregiver, a parent is going to make if they want their child to apply at 15. So that is getting ready to change. And then again, you have the 6 months that you practice and you're supposed to log your hours. 10 of those need to be nighttime driving. The person in the vehicle with the teen driver has to be at least 21 years old. So it can't be a sibling that is 17 or 18. It has to be, 21 or older. Again, only one unrelated person in the car that's a teen under 20. They aren't permitted to drive between 12 and 6 a.m. Now, there's exceptions to that, if it's an emergency or, they have a job. But we just know, kids probably shouldn't be out in those hours. They need to be home. They need to be off the road. And, my mom used to say nothing good happens, during, 12 to 6 a.m. And, there are impaired drivers that are typically out at that time. So, again, making sure that these rules are followed. If you get pulled over for a moving violation, maybe running a red light, not stopping at a stop sign, not, using a traffic signal, then that resets for the 180 days. So you could be a week from being able to take your road test. If you get pulled over, you get cited for that, then you can have to start all over for another 6 months. So you have to make sure you're following the rules of the road. After that 6 month, you can determine if you're ready to take the road test. And if you pass, you get a little sticker, like I said, that's on your permit. If you fail, you have to wait 7 days before you can retake it. And all of those are by appointment. So you have to, get an appointment and get it scheduled. There are driver education training that you can take. There's several in Lexington, several companies that offer driver education for not just teens but anyone, and you can reach out to those companies to get your child enrolled in that. It's typically for maybe an hour, a very short session, is like $100, and a little bit longer can go upwards of even $500. So I know some parents say they're not cut out for that. It's very just found very challenging time, kind of stressful. So if that's, something that you'd rather have, someone else kind of do, at least maybe the start of that, you can reach out to some of those companies. You have your intermediate for another 6 months. So at that time, you again are not permitted to drive between 12 and 6. And if you're, again, under 18, you're limited to one unrelated person in the vehicle. So again, this is just meant to stretch this out so that you're not just giving your kids like, you can drive by yourself, you can drive with one person, but there's limits to when you can drive. And again, that's for protection of the teen driver. And hopefully if everyone follows these rules, that helps with, seeing a decline in these types of accidents. So step 3 is you get your full unrestricted license. So after, the last 6 months, you can go get your, what we want to go from your vertical to your horizontal license. And you can apply for that at the clerk's office. You can go down and get that. But what I want to say is, when that happens and some of those restrictions are lifted, still think about maybe the weaknesses that you've seen in your child's ability to drive. Where do they need some more practice? Where do they need more help? Maybe they didn't do a lot of practice in driving in traffic. Maybe they didn't do a lot of practice on the interstate. Find out where they need to get some of that extra practice and continue to teach, continue to ride with them and give them advice, praise them when they're doing really good, but also make sure that you're continuing to give them those experiences so that, eventually they will be able to drive better at night, be able to drive in bad weather, so that you don't have to worry. We always will. That never goes away. But again, just thinking about, some of those things that we don't just want to say, you've got your license, you're going to be the new, chaperone, or not the chaperone, the chauffeur at home. Making sure again that, these kids get the time and the effort poured into them so that, that your child is a good driver and can make good decisions. I'm going to skip this Hunter story. It's another story that just kind of was shared about a teen driver, and hopefully you'll be able to see that if we send this out. So we're going to kind of end tonight with some tips to keeping teen drivers and passengers safe. So we're going to go through these pretty quickly. Wearing your seatbelt, that should be no exception ever. Everybody in the car buckled up every time. We have a primary seatbelt law in the state of Kentucky that says everyone in the car has to be buckled up, whether that's the seatbelt or in the child restraint. But that is the only safety device that we actually have in the car that's going to protect us in a crash. The airbags will help some, but it's only going to benefit us if we are buckled up. So, making sure that that is enforced and that your kids follow that rule, because it's quick and easy, and there really is no reason why they shouldn't. Again, set an example. You are the number one influencer of your team. They're watching you drive, and again, making sure that you're doing all the right things. And when you're not doing something, explain it. Because what we didn't say here earlier that has to do with something different is no one can text and drive. That's against the law in the state of Kentucky to text and drive for anyone. Doesn't matter if you're 16 or 56 or 106, you can't text and drive. So don't do it. But if you're under 18, you cannot be on your cell phone, even having a conversation. So you can't talk on your cell phone if you're under 18 and operating a car. A lot of parents don't know that. But if you're over 18, you're a mom, you may be on the phone having a conversation with, your husband or your mother. So say, I can because I'm over the age of 18. You can't because that is the law in the state of Kentucky that you can't be on the phone at all, even for a conversation. So take that into account, that you don't want to be calling your kid all the time. Follow them on Life 360 so that they got there, and then call if you need to tell them something. But don't call them and have them distracted, and don't have them break the law. So again, making sure that you know what the laws are and that you can inform them and enforce them. So again, talk about how to drive distraction free, which means hands on the wheels, eyes on the road, mind on the task, and your ears alert. Talk about how to be aware and a vocal passenger. So if they are a passenger in a car, making sure that they, feel empowered to speak up, to say, you're scaring me. Can you slow down? Maybe even have I don't know what you want to call it, maybe a password, a special word that if they call you and they use it, then that means that maybe they want you to come pick them up, and maybe they don't want to continue to be, driven by someone else. And I've had my kids do that before when they had to share seat belts and they knew I wouldn't approve that someone was speeding. And I said, make me the bad guy. Say that, you're in trouble and I'm coming to get you, and I'll pick you up. So don't get back in the car. So, come up with some sort of agreement or system that if they're scared, they can always feel like they can call you, and just make that a policy. I'll always come and get you. I'll always pick you up. Those types of things. Know the driver and choose safety over convenience. Again, enforce that one unrelated passenger rule. And then, make sure you have a conversation with your child to say, you can't take anyone with you unless you ask me first. And I don't want you to go with anyone else till you ask me first. So just, making sure that you know where they're going, who they're going with. Do you think they're a safe driver? Are they a new driver? And really, do you want to put your child in a situation that might be unsafe? So, things for you all to think about and discuss as a family. Follow the graduated driver licensing laws. They're not there to kind of hinder or make life difficult. They're there to try to make sure teen drivers and teen passengers are protected. Practice, practice, practice. Day and night driving, different weather conditions, different scenarios. Again, I grew up learning to drive in Winchester, so there wasn't the traffic that was in Lexington, but sometimes I would drive to Lexington, um, and my mom would, be in the passenger seat. And, finally, after she thought I had mastered it a little bit better, I could go to Lexington myself. But it was a very different driving environment than what I had been used to in Lexington. I mean, in Winchester, with all the traffic, the stoplights, the speed, all of those different things. So, again, practice, practice, practice. And just think about it. If your child plays an instrument in band or is in a sport, they have probably taken hours and hours of practice, hours and hours of coaching before they even got probably proficient at a particular skill. So driving is the same way. They're not just going to, after 60 hours, become an expert driver. Things change constantly on roads. And so we have to be able to navigate all of that and adapt. So again, practice and just think about it. I still kind of get stressed in certain driving conditions and places that I drive. So think about, someone that has, is new to this, and we want them to not feel stressed and make poor decisions, but we need to make sure that we give them the time and the practice to hone their skills. Talk to other parents about your expectations. If someone wants your child to drive them to a practice or pick them up from practice and take them home, explain to them why you don't want your child to have that responsibility, that you don't want, you want to follow the graduated driver licensing laws, that you want your child not to have distractions, you want your child to have more practice, you want your child to be a better, safer driver before you introduce anyone else into that driving experience. So, talk to parents and let them know your expectations. And again, drowsy driving is distracted driving. So just making sure that if your teen is sleepy, again, you can assess that, making sure that they don't get behind the wheel of a car. And then last here is advocate for GDL laws at your teen school. And that, again, hopefully be a good example and enforce those. And then, it might help someone else reinforce it with their child because you do. We only have a couple minutes left, and I hate that I'm skipping some of this, but I don't want to keep you all later. But there is a podcast here that when you look at it on this apple.com, there's, some good information and just discussion about parents of teen drivers. So you don't have to, feel like you're in this alone. But the good news is many, many, many car crashes are preventable. So, making an agreement with your driver about expectations, about, the extra practice you feel like they need, just making sure that you're on the same page and that you can trust that your teen driver is going to follow all of those rules. It's a slow process. So again, don't be in a hurry to just, give them the keys to the car. It is, something that is a very dangerous time for new drivers. And many, many conferences that I have attended that talk about teen driver safety, all of them are in agreement that this is probably the most dangerous time of any person's life is to be a teen driver, to be behind the wheel of a vehicle at these speeds with all the other cars on the road as well. It's very dangerous. And we're asking these kids to do this at, 16, 17 years old. So, just think about that responsibility for them and for you as well as their parents. So I'm going to stop there because we have just a couple minutes. Does anybody want to come off mute and ask a question, make a comment? And I apologize that, this kind of went long and we weren't able to show, but I hope you got the gist of what we tried to convey tonight, to help you make some decisions about your team driver and maybe some additional steps that you can take to ensure that they, are safe